is the worst teacher you've ever had? Story 1. My 4th grade math teacher murdered his mother. So there's that. Edit. If you want to read messed up stories about other murdering teachers, check the comments to this one. There's some up down there. Story 2. My 8th grade French teacher. I'm not even sure she spoke French. She usually just put on a movie, usually in French with English subtitles, sometimes not if she couldn't figure out how to change the language. And it was almost always Finding Nemo. I learned nothing in her class except that there is a limit to the number of times someone can watch Finding Nemo before going insane. Edit. Apparently a lot of people have had a teacher like this. Good to know that I'm not alone. Edit 2. Also, Muzzy seems to be quite popular among these other French teachers. Story 3. Homeschooled. You mom? Dad, you're cool. I am a diabetic and my blood sugar had started to go low. My teacher told me I could wait till the bell in 5 minutes till I could quickly go to my locker in between classes for my jelly beans. I nearly started crying from panic low. Blood sugar is quick and dangerous and I just walked out. He later had to apologize to me. Edit. I went to school in a rural area in Australia. I have been given the option of glucose tablets, but they are not commonly used in my area, especially with younger kids. My diabetes educator and endo have both said that the glucogel jelly beans are perfectly fine. I should have had some on me, yes, but I'm human, and I was a teenager. Edit 2. I never thought about taking the matters any further. I didn't even tell my parents this time as it happens quite frequently ignorance. The school had my medical record, but I doubt every single teacher will go through those files and find out who is diabetic and so on. Story 4. I had a teacher in freshman English who would give the girls bonus points and extra credit for wearing short skirts to class. He also was guilty of some pretty consistent touchy, caressing, grabby personal space violations with them too. It wasn't until I was older, and he was out of the school that I realized how wrong it was. Story 5. I'm deaf and wear 2 hearing aids. As punishment, my grade 3 teacher used to take off my hearing aids and make me sit in the hallway alone. Edit. Answering a few questions. This happened in 1988. This was just one of many sadistic punishment techniques she used. She did this several times. I don't really remember how long it lasted since it was 26 years ago, but my best friend told my mom. I didn't know it was even wrong. I trusted the authority of teachers. I can't even remember what I did, but I know it didn't take much to set her off, and she also absolutely loved singling kids out in class and embarrassing them. She would dump the contents of your desk out in front of the class and make you clean it up while everyone watched if you took too long getting out a book or pencil. Once we had swimming lessons and afterwards I couldn't find my underwear. But I was so afraid of being late that I just went commando and later tried to whisper to her that I couldn't find my underwear. She yells out, in front of the entire class, "You're not wearing your underwear." Her name was Mrs. Barron. And in the 5th grade, I won a writing contest about the evil Red Baron, who got shot down in the skies by Ace, a top dog fighter. I got my revenge through the pen. Oh, and my bulldog of a mother. Story 6. I had a history teacher who was a major to everyone. There was a guy who was born on February 29th, and this teacher constantly bullied and harassed him. This teacher said, "Oh, you're only 4 years old. No wonder you're so stupid." What do you know? That guy ended up leaving the school in the next few weeks. Anyway, I aced all the exams, and I ended up with a big fat B. Very poor book decorations, he said on my report. It was history class, not art class. Story 7. There was my 7th grade history teacher who taught history Bible study. Then there was my uni anthropology teacher who started the semester by telling the class that the white students should either not enter class discussions or drop the class. After a few classes, she asked one girl why she never contributed in class. "You said white kids shouldn't talk." "You're not white, though." "Yeah, I am. I'm 2nd-generation American. My parents came from Europe. My entire history is European." "But you're Hispanic." "No, I'm not. My family is from Spain. So you are Hispanic." The argument kept going until the girl just walked out of the classroom. The teacher was literally telling the girl what she could and could not identify with within her own heritage. That teacher also gave us gems such as, "Even mixed race people can be racist." "I, the teacher, can't be racist. I'm mixed race." "You can choose any culture you want for your final project." Telling some students to choose different cultures because France, Italy, and Norway are apparently cultural voids. She was basically the reason that I actually could believe that Tumblr activists could be as dumb as they are. Edits INB4 Spaniards are Hispanic. I got the TIA plug the first 6 times. Not to be rude, but I've likely already answered whatever questions you've got. Do Ketrel F or something IDK. Story 8. My pre-modern history teacher at 6th form was a bit of a tyrant but also shocking at teaching. At the start of the year, he dumped a 4-centimeter thick pack of handouts on everyone's desk. The instructions every lesson were continue to read and highlight. The guy would go mental anytime someone spoke, moved, or even looked up from the booklet. He threw a dictionary at a guy's head when he asked for a definition. Thankfully, he was sacked after the incident. Edit typo. Story 9. I had a teacher that seriously thought that since we were a mostly black and brown class, it would be like one of those dreadful white teacher comes in and teaches everyone the value of learning movies. It went about as well as you'd expect. Story 10. I had a relatively young teacher who had clearly peaked in high school and was back to hang out with the cool kids. If you were popular, you got away with anything. And if you weren't, you could see the pain on his face when he had to give you some of his time. The guy also liked to go to high school kids' parties and creep out on the girls. He was everything I aspire not to be. Story 11. When I lived in South Africa, we had corporal punishment in school. I had a math teacher who had it out for me. He'd cane me for offenses like bad handwriting. One time I got 98 on a test, beat everyone in the class, including his favorites. Result? He gave me 2 licks anyway. Why? So next time I wouldn't miss the remaining 2. Story 12. We had a history teacher that would insult people's mothers a lot. For example, he'd pick on a small, unpopular kid and say like Barry's mom is coming into class tomorrow to tell us what it was like during the reign of Henry VIII. Had also watch in class sometimes. Hey lads, look where he's putting the mints. Edit props to you Jesus Desaad for finding the link. NSFW. However, safe for school apparently. Story 13. I had a math teacher who literally didn't teach math at all. He just wrote the numbers on the board for the problems we had to do in the textbook. All class long, he would just sit at his desk on his office chair and stare at his computer. And every time he had to move around the classroom, he would just roll around in his office chair, waddling his feet against the ground. Every time I turned in work, he would just stare at the paper for literally 3 seconds, make a huge check mark on it with his pen, and write down 100 in his gradebook. He never checked the answers. I tested it one day. A friend and I wrote penis for a few answers on our work and made him check our work. Did he notice? Nope. Did we get an A? Yup. He had the counselors make me skip pre-algebra and go straight into an algebra I class. Had no clue what I was doing. Edit words and stuff. Didn't expect this to blow up like this. But to let you all know, after that year I did okay in my math classes. Story 14. I had a teacher who was seriously a total. There are so many reasons. One time I had a video game disc in my backpack. Not a hand console or anything, just a game. She saw it and took it away because they are not good for us and never gave it back. She many times just emptied one girl's bag because she had smoked but didn't anymore. The teacher suspected her of smoking and many times just opened her bag and turned it upside down so everything was on the floor. And the girl always had to pick them up. We many times helped unless the teacher went full mad at us. Once I got full score from a test, but she gave me a 9. 10 is best for you who have letter grades. I asked how, and she said, nobody is perfect enough for a 10. On Monday, we had 2 classes of Kusich's last, and we often had them tugger, so we got to leave earlier. Different teacher in music, we got out 14:40. The bus home left 14:45. The stop was next to school, so we managed to get to that bus easily. Our teacher said that school ends at 1500 and we couldn't go to that bud, and had to wait the one that comes 1525. She held us. We had a 5-person class and only 2 of us went to that bus, so we didn't get to it. Then, when she released us, we yelled, "You the music teacher let us go, so we will go home," and started running for the next stop. The bus did a little side trip, and we had straight way, so we made it and went home with that bus. One time, one kid had forgotten his homework for the first time. The teacher went full crazy and started telling it high and stabbing his book with a ballpoint pen. The kid had to pay for a new one cause of the holes. One time we were going to eat and the teacher said I can't bring my coat. After eating, I asked her to open the class door so I can get it. She said that I can't get anything from class during recess and I should have taken it before. Then she forced me outside with my t-shirt. It was winter and 18 Celsius, and it was the 45-minute recess what was after eating. Afterwards in class, I got detention because my sneezing was disrupting the class. One time she took one student's 5 bill because she was sure it was stolen. One student had emailed help on homework to another student. Teacher found out and forcefully got the password from the student, and she deleted the email account. One time she didn't allow me to go to my cousin's car when he picked me up because she didn't know him. She forced me in the bus. I told my cousin to wait at the next stop and went to his car there. We never use the school computers cause if we use them, nobody else can use them. That isn't fair. We had subjects what we could choose ourselves. She changed them herself to what she wanted. I remember me and one other kid chose different ones and neither chose ballet. Somehow we both ended up in same ballet. I asked her to show the choosing paper and she had made a new one and poorly copied my signature. When it was the last day with her, we all said at the same time, "We hope the shittiest of life to you. We all hate you. Go die in a hole. You." She tried to give us detention. Didn't succeed. There are many more stories of her. Edit okay, I'll give you more stories. One guy, he bullied me lots, hit me in the head with a little plastic thingy. Then he ran to the teacher and said I hit him. Teacher believed him, even when I'm bleeding from my forehead and he is completely fine. We had to be at the door of the class when the clock was something sore and something 15 after food. It was first class of the day. I was at the door at 7:55. Teacher had started the class at 7:50 because she was early. I got detention for being late. One time the bus I went to school with broke down, some dude rear-ended it. And because of that, I was hour late. The backup bus didn't come really fast as we were at the other side of the city where the bus company's garage was. The driver gave me a paper. What explained the situation printed on a computer. He had those to everyone in the bus, for example, bosses and teachers to give it. Even had a stamp on it. Teacher said I faked it and gave me detention. When swine flu not. Sure, if correct name was a thing, we got shots for it. The school nurse said some students may feel sick after it. I did. Even threw up on my desk. Asked to go home. Nope, cause some math thing I already know is more important. I threw up 2 more times and still she didn't let me home. Once when we were eating, I wasn't hungry, so I took just a little food. She said I'm not going to make the day with that amount of food. She grabbed my plate and put loads of food on it and gave it to me. When I couldn't eat the huge load of food, she said, "You are going to eat it. You eat what you take." Didn't help telling I didn't take the damn food. My dad works in waste management, did a presentation for the whole school about recycling. After that, we went to the computers, only time ever, and she told us to look up the town's garbage dump in Google Maps. The computers were slow, so I told her, "Imma not do it as it is my dad, so I know where he is the boss at." Didn't believe he was my dad. I told her that we have the same last name, and he gave me 10 after presentation and called me son. She went mad because I talked to her disrespectfully. My grade 10 English teacher told me flat to my face I'd never amount to anything. Never do anything post-secondary and fail at life. I phoned her up the day I got my engineering degree to gloat. Edit. Since a couple of people are asking, the phone call basically went me calling the main school number, asking to speak to her, saying, "Hi, this is my name. I remember what you told me in grade 10. I just wanted to let you know I am receiving my bachelor's in engineering with honors today. No thanks to you," and she hung up on me. As to if she was trying to motivate me, I have no idea if that's what she was trying, but I legit did not understand the material and needed help. I always got horrible marks in English in high school because I just didn't get it. I don't know if she thought I didn't care or what her problem was, but it had the opposite effect. It crushed me, made me feel worthless, and made me give up on ever understanding English. My marks in grade 10 plummeted. I barely passed, then barely passed grade 11 as well. Another teacher who actually cared turned me around. The only reason I got into university is I absolutely destroyed math and science. She wasn't the only teacher I called that day. I also called several to thank them for being a positive influence. Story. 15 grade 8 English teacher. You know how every kid says to their parents, "My teacher just hates me" when they get a bad mark? This actually, I swear to this day, was really true. This teacher really just truly hated me, and I have no idea why. I wasn't a troublemaker. I didn't talk in class or make smart comments. He just didn't like me for no reason that I'll ever know. Anyways, we had these journals that we had to turn in every week. One week I didn't get mine back, and he said, I got no marks for my journal because I didn't turn it in, except, yes I did. He called me a liar and said I would have to purchase another journal and just turn in next week's assignment. Oh, we couldn't just use regular journals. We had to have these special stupid ones that he insisted on for some reason, because I tried to hand in the next assignment on paper and he refused to accept it. For a few weeks, I kept asking him to return my journal, and he kept telling me that I was a liar and getting zeros for my journal entries. I was afraid to ask my mom to buy me a new journal because my parents used to be fairly cheap, and I thought I was going to get in for supposedly losing it. So one day when my teacher left the classroom to go to the bathroom in front of the entire class, I marched over to his bag, rifled through it, and found my journal. I turned it in the next week with a journal entry, and he never said a word about it. But that wasn't even the end of it. Shortly after that, we had an essay assignment. I poured my heart into this, and on the day we got our marks on it, he came into class and loudly proclaimed in front of everyone, "Another F chaos cat. I don't know how you can turn in work like that to me. You are now failing the class." I was beyond mortified. I literally ran out of the class crying. It still upsets me to this day. For anyone who is wondering, I'm not bad at English despite possible bad grammar in my Reddit posts. I've maintained a solid A average in all 8 English classes I've taken through university. So take that grade 8 English teacher. TLDR, my grade 8 English teacher hated me and tried to deliberately fail me. My 3rd grade teacher hated me, told me on more than one occasion, "You are poor white trash. You will just end up in prison. I wish I didn't have to waste my time on you, and I'm not wasting my time teaching poor white prison trash. Figure it out yourself," I told my mom, the principals, the counselors. No one believed me at all. Story 16. I had a physics teacher who said during a meeting with my parents that if he could put people off studying physics, he was doing his job. Well, I graduated with a BS Tunes in theoretical physics last year. F you, Mr. Teacher. That and we had a maths teacher who turned out to be a pedophile. Story 17. I remember getting in with a teacher because I got 100 in a test. Apparently, I embarrassed the other kids. If only I was that smart now, I wouldn't be playing on Reddit instead of work. Story 18. I had a teacher in 7th grade technology class, which was essentially a bullshit class made, so we would have some basic idea of how basic things like an engine and a battery worked. Anyways, the teacher for that class legitimately didn't do anything all day, would openly hit on this one kid and one day just cussed out the entire class about how terrible we were and how we should all go ourselves. She was almost immediately let go. On the plus side, we got a really chill long-term sub who let us watch movies for the 2 remaining months of school. One of my friends came over and reminded me of this gem of a detail. She came back the next day and tried to continue teaching the class despite her termination the day before. They had to call security to get her out of the building. Story 19. Offense. First class of community college. Assigned to write a paper answering 15 history questions, the paper must be at least 20 pages in length. As it was my first class in college, I go to work with a will, writing complete thoughtful answers with good sources. When I turn it in, the history teacher, aka the rodeo coach, says, "Wait here and I can grade it for you," and proceeds to count the pages and gives me a 100. Revenge. At the same college the next semester, I had a government teacher, aka the basketball coach, assigned a 20 paper over government. So I turned in the same paper from the previous semester's history class with a different cover sheet. Got another 100. Story 20. We had a business teacher who said he was a big fan of group learning, so he would put us in groups and make us correct our own homework and teach each other while he spent the class time gambling online. We all failed business. Story 21. Her name was Mrs. DeSacchio. She was my first grade teacher. Absolutely nothing but awful and rude to me, and made me sit by myself every day, make fun of me, and have other kids make fun of me with her for answering a question wrong. She tried to get my mother to put me on ADHD medication. This was absolutely out-freaking-rageous because I was an extremely docile and well-behaved quiet little girl. She just had it out for me. So I had just moved to this school and started with no friends because she estranged me from everyone. I had no confidence. My mother stepped in and tried to have me removed from her class. When asked why, my mother responded with, "I think she would do better with someone a little more maternal than you are." This made mad. I couldn't be removed from her class because it was too late on the year, and from that point on she made my life a living. I don't think I had recess after that. I didn't have any free time after that, and on party days, she put me last so I had the last choice of the cake and juices and stuff. I dreaded going to school. I did absolutely nothing to deserve that. Story 22. My 10th grade chem teacher. First day of class, I was sitting in the front row as that's where I normally like to sit. She took 2 chemicals, threw them both into a Ziploc bag together, and informed us that that chemical reaction was creating a gas that was toxic and would kill us if we breathed it in. She then carelessly tossed the bag onto her desk right in front of me. I never sat in the front row of her class again. One time, she decided to take that phosphorus you have to keep in liquid out, so we could see how it burst into flames when exposed to the air. She thought that putting it on a stand with a fan behind it blowing towards the door would be enough ventilation. It wasn't. We had to evacuate the classroom. Then there was the time the German club hosted their annual exchange students, and they would follow their hosts around to all their classes for a few days. We had 2 people in German club in that class, so one day we got 2 German students tagging along. She said there wasn't enough room for them to sit in her classroom, which wasn't true, as the back half of the classroom was an empty lab, plenty of space, and so she said they had to sit in the supply closet. She then locked them in the supply closet, and they only got out when the teacher from the adjoining classroom came through there. This is a story from the other class in my year. A kid had stepped on a nail outside and it had gone through his shoe and into his foot. So he asked her if he could go to the nurse. She said no, so he got up and walked out. She called down to the nurse to tell her this kid was coming down there and to send him right back, because he just up and left without permission. When he got to the nurse, she was like, "Yeah, you need medical attention." This teacher was also my mother's best friend's next-door neighbor. And when best friend's son was a toddler, the teacher's dachshund ran over into their yard and bit their son in the face. Not too bad. He's not disfigured. Bonus crazy teacher story. In college, I had a biology teacher who told us at the end of the cheek cell DNA lab to put our slides in the container marked bleach and not to rinse them off before. I rinsed mine off anyway and put it in the container marked bleach. At the end of class, she triumphantly informed us that she now had all of our DNA and she would be selling it to health insurance companies so they could discriminate against us for genetic conditions, and that just because the container was marked bleach didn't mean it was actually full of bleach. Taldar, science teachers are crazy. Story 23. I had a lecturer at sixth form college who once took up an entire lesson telling us how she and her husband had brought home a drunken man for a threesome. She went into detail about how her husband had bummed him. She was the kind who would always try and be friends with all the students. I think she was still in her 20s. She'd go out drinking with us all, and would often invite students to her house. Eventually, she left to work in a bar. Last I heard of her about 8 to 9 years ago, she was divorced and living with her 18-year-old boyfriend and his family, sharing a bedroom with him and his little brother, possibly bunk beds. I may have imagined the bunk beds. Edit some words what I spelled wrong. Also took out a bit that implied the story itself was untoward, that the threesome was in some way against the man's will. It wasn't, but the fact of telling a class of teenagers about it was less than appropriate. Story 24. I had a sociology psychology class in high school that I was totally stoked for because crime has always been a morbid curiosity, fascination of mine. I went into the class thinking I was going to ace it, but I was terribly wrong. This is only because the teacher hated me from the moment she put her beady little eyes on me. She came off as uninterested in everything I had to say to her, would purposely not call on me if I knew an answer to a question, i.e., I was the only person to raise their hand in the class 70 of the time, and she would look around and say, "Anyone?" I think this was because I had a rep of knowing about the things we discussed in class, and she was intimidated. Sounds egotistical of me, I know. Anyway, I had just finished reading a whole biography on Richard Ramirez outside of school. Then we ended up learning about him within a month of me reading the book. A test was coming up about him, and I knew I had it down pat. Despite how low my scores were on every other test, I knew I did well on. Her tests consisted of about 10 sheets of paper, with probably a total of 2 to 3 questions on each side of paper, leaving you with an unlined white abyss for your words to get all crooked and up in. For each question about this serial killer, I wrote a novel. Not a single bit of white was left on the paper. I turned it in, proudly walked away from it, and anxiously awaited the day we got our tests back. Almost exactly as a familiar scene from A Christmas Story, I sat down, was prepared for my teacher to start writing A all across the room and applauding me on how well prepared I was for the test. And just like the movie, I was disappointed, but probably more so. I got a FAF. I flipped to the end of my test to see if there were any notes, and written in shitty red cursive was, "Not information learned in class. Cannot cite these facts." I was livid, and gave up on that class from that moment on. No matter how hard I tried, she hated me for some reason. I failed the class. The end. TLDR psychology teacher hated me. Displayed more knowledge on a subject than her. She failed me. My worst teacher would have to be a programming professor in college. My first class with him was Visual Basic. He was the type of teacher that would hand out zeros if your program did not compile when he was marking it. I received a 0 on many tests and assignments because he claimed it didn't compile. I don't know if he just didn't like me, but when I tried my copies of my submissions, they compiled just fine without any modifications. So, during our final exam, I called him over as though I had a question. Instead, I was done the program and was ready to hand it in. I made him watch as I compiled the program, copied it to a floppy disk, handed it to him and said, "Now tell me it doesn't compile." I got a 35 in the class. I took it again during the next term with a different teacher and got a 98. Story 25. Her nickname was Miss Shrieky because her last name sounded something like Cherokee, and she was infamous for shouting a lot, hence the nickname. She shouted and belittled just about every child. Once, she was assigned to take our class to their swimming lesson at some leisure center, and when we got there, I found out that I had forgotten my trunks. When I told her, she yelled right in my face, "You stupid boy," and treated me like I was the dumbest person on earth. Another time, I had to go to the staff room to give her a message. I knocked on the door, knock, knock, knock. She yanked the door open and began screaming at me for knocking on the door 3 times, ranting and raving about how you're only meant to knock on the door once, and she told me she was going to shut the door and that I should knock on the door again, properly. She shut the door, I knocked the door once, and she yanked it back open and something like, "Now, what is it?" And once I told her whatever the message was, she slammed the door in my face. She was a right. Story 26. College professor. Abnormal psychology. Not only was he overtly homophobic, but his English was extremely hard to understand. He literally taught straight out of the textbook. Let's look at the third paragraph on page 35. His tests had been Xeroxed so many times that they were covered with little black spots and you could get the answers from people who already took the class, and he repeated, "Is that so?" So many times that I finally started counting them. 168 in a 3-hour period. There was a break halfway through the class, and most of the people would just leave, but he either didn't notice or didn't care. At the end of the semester, we received the evaluation forms where you're supposed to provide feedback on the class. Usually people just go through the motions, but everyone turned it over and started writing furiously on the back, complaining that this guy should not be teaching. This was in 1998. Guess what? He's still there. A recent quote from Rate My Professor. From 2010, I have never disliked a class this much in my life. Not only is his accent completely incomprehensible, he doesn't even teach. He just throws out the same anecdotes every session, which usually make no sense anyway, or waxes poetic about Piaget. Would probably rather eat fire ants than take another class with him. Story 27. One teacher grabbed one student and was holding him out of the window for 20 seconds and shouting at him. It was on the third floor and we were 7 years old. Later that year, he was arrested. He even put someone into the cupboard for solid 2 hours. Edit no, this is not from Matilda. We were all crying and telling him he would kill the boy who was in the cupboard. Story 28. My trigonometry teacher in 11th grade. I had loved and excelled in basically all the other math classes I had taken up to this point, but after her class it was all over. She was a short, bitter, older woman with longer curly hair and a terrible attitude. If you didn't get a concept at first, she would talk down to you like you were some inferior being and would actively avoid actually explaining the process to you. Her terrible attitude and lack of teaching made me hate that class so much. She sucked. Story 29. My first grade teacher. She forced me to write with my right hand even though I'm a lefty. She changed the entire course of my life. I hate her. Edit me. Story 30. One of my college professors said, I am not here to teach you. You should be learning from the book. I am just the babysitter. He was one of those guys who is more interested in being everybody's friend than doing his job. We would sit around for hours while he bullshitted with his favorite group, and I paid for it. I complained to his bosses, but I don't think anything happened. Story 31, grade 2. I had a teacher who looned out at me for coloring incorrectly. Oh, I wasn't going outside of the lines or anything like that bullshit. The direction that I was coloring was not all the same. She grabbed my drawing and ripped it up and told me to do it again. At this point, I was not pleased and refused. That is how I ended up with detention and staying late after school. Story 32. I once had this English teacher in middle school 8th grade, aptly named Mrs. Roode. I had transferred to this school in the middle of 7th, so I was still settled comfortably into my I don't really know anyone still, so I shall remain quiet as a means to meet new people phase. Whilst being quieter than a church mouse, strange things began to happen in Mrs. Roode's 8th grade English lit class that I began to notice. 1. We had a substitute, and the first thing she says after the tardy bell rings and we are all settled is, your teacher has left with me a list of students that I should keep an eye on. As she's reading through the short list out loud to the class, I'm going in my head not surprised how she is on that list, but then Losh calls out Whombit Frog username substituted because reasons. I was taken aback. I didn't understand. Me? Me? Why the heck was I on that list? I had never done anything bad in that class. As a matter of fact, I had done nothing but my assignments in that class. I was left confused for days. Then we had our weekly stems test parts of words that are of Latin origin and have their own generic meaning, like hydro for water in the words hydroponic, hydrophobic, etc. I take my test, turn it in before many other students in the class, and feel confident that I had gotten at least 95 of the answers correct. When the end of the day bell rings, Mrs. Roode asked me to stay for a minute afterwards. In my head, I was wondering why she wanted to speak with me since I was already a problem student by her standards. She pulled out my STEMS test from the stack and started asking me questions about it. Then she started asking me questions that could have fit on the test, but weren't. I answered them fine, by my standards, but then she accused me of cheating and said that she would have to give me a 0 for the test. Being the shy, awkward bundle of hormones that I was all I could muster was the deafening, okay. I went home and told my mom about it and cried a little. I had never experienced a you cheated accusation before. I had no idea how to deal with it, especially when it was simply not true. Enter Act 3. One day I hear from a student that had Mrs. Roode for another block. Teachers would teach the same material to 3 or 4 different classes all day, and each were called blocks that she accused me of stealing a calculator from her, and that if anyone saw me with it to let her know. I do not know how true this student's recall was, but I know that no such announcement had been made in my class. However, during my class I get called to the office. I go, and they direct me to the guidance counselor. In my head I'm thinking, what now? I go into the guidance counselor's office and sit down in the chair in front of her desk. We exchange greetings. She then asks me, Whombat Frog, do you know why I've asked you here today? All intervention-like. I shake my head no. She says that she had been notified by one of my teachers, guess who? That I may have a slight anger issue and that an anger management club is going to be meeting once a week during lunch. She let me know we could bring our lunch with us to the meeting, oh goody, and that she thought I could benefit from it. I told her that I really didn't understand why I would have been referred to this club. I wasn't aware of any issues I had with anger. At this point, I was beginning to have issues only with one person in particular, but I had not acted on it yet. She then asked me as bluntly as possible, "Are you on any medication?" I told her that I wasn't, and regret to this day, of not shooting her down by saying, "Why is that any concern of yours? And it really isn't any of your business." Her follow-up. Oh, her follow-up of all the brazen, offensive, outright terrible things to say to a 14-year-old crept out of her mouth with its talons aimed right at my self-confidence. Well, maybe you should speak to your doctor about that. What? What did that even mean? Was she insinuating that no, cue me telling mom and crying again? The kicker here is this. When I got back to the classroom, I could tell that my backpack had been searched through. Nothing was taken, but nothing was in the right little pockets. It was just shoved back into my bag. No, I didn't steal your calculator. Intermission Act 4. The Parent-Teachers Student Conference, aka the Share the Blame meeting. The pharmaceutical rep counselor was the last straw for my mom. Mind you, other small things delivered to her soaked with my tears had also led up to this event, all because of Mrs. Roode. After school, my mother and I meet in the office. She, a single working mom, had to take time off of work for this. Then, all of my teachers show up to the meeting. I didn't quite understand why at the time because the only issues were occurring in Mrs. Roode's class and not any of my others. After about 20 minutes of issues being brought up that apparently were all cause for concern of my well-being, I was literally a straight-A student except for the C I was carrying in Mrs. Roode's class. My mother turned to me and asked me to step outside for a moment. I asked her later what had happened because she had stormed out of the room about 10 minutes later with steam shooting out of her head, grabbed me, and said that we were leaving. She told me that she would tell me after I finished the 8th grade what had happened. She kept her promise. She said that after I had left, she continued the conversation about me coming home every day bawling my eyes out because of Mrs. Roode's class and yada yada yada. Then, she stood up, pointed into Mrs. Roode's face and said, "Whombat frog's not the problem. You are. Yay, go mom." And now for our final scene. The singling out and ostracization by Mrs. Roode continued. My post-school sobbing continued. However, I started giving Mrs. Roode subtle hardships during class, such as not paying attention, acting plain weird, and talking over her during class. She had this mental picture of me, and yes, it may have been the wrong thing to do, but I was going to give it to her, damn it. Anyway, I said I did your mom last night. To a student, tensions were running high. It was late May, and we both got sent to the assistant principal's office. There, I was asked if I had said that, and I owned it. Yes, I said. He asked me if I would still had said it if the student's mother had been right in front of me. My answer had not changed. He then asked me if I would have said it if my mom could hear. I told him probably. He then interrogated me as to why I was causing Mrs. Roode trouble in her class lately. Cue the waterworks. I couldn't help it. It was like no one in administration had ever really addressed it before. This was not me. I don't do things that get me sent to the assistant principal's office. I regaled my epic tale of woe. He then said, "And I will never ever forget this," he said. Sometimes, whombat frog, we are put into situations where, whether we like or dislike a person, we still have to work with them, tolerate them, and be nice to them. I literally stopped breathing and stared at him for a good minute. While I understand that his statement is absolutely true in the adult world, this was a situation involving a crazy woman in her early 40s and a 14-year-old student. This advice was far less than appropriate. It made me return to my sobs harder. I ended the meeting with a sigh. Are we done? Bonus material. 1. I had fallen and busted my ankle and knee and needed to be on crutches for about a month, and upon doctor's orders needed to keep my books in each of my classrooms instead of carrying them. After the second week of still on crutches, Sis Roode decided it was time for me to carry my English book again, but the incompetent kid who was extremely forgetful was still allowed to keep his in the class for the rest of the year. 2. She made me retake my 150-question multiple-choice midterm because she again accused me of cheating. I retook it and still made an A. 3. She once gave us a reading assignment where we needed to jot down any words we didn't know while reading the entire book and turn in. I only wrote down one word because it was the only word I didn't understand, and received an F because I didn't have enough words written down. Right? I apologize for having had an above 8th grade vocabulary. This experience alone turned me off of school. I nearly flunked my freshman year of high school because I had been driven to a point of not caring anymore. All of this because of one bad teacher and one hellacious experience. I'm fine now. I found my drive to be successful again. I have recently graduated college with honors, so no worries. I completely understand now why some students stop caring about school. I am a firm believer now that bad people, mentors, and teachers make good students into bad students adults. It is people like Mrs. Roode that truly give a horrible stereotype to a noble and frankly near impossible to succeed in sometimes profession. Mad respect for the good ones, mad respect. She still teaches. She is the only bad teacher I have ever had, including university. TLDR. This teacher singled me out from the get-go. Staged interventions of behavior. Mom got in her face about it. Nothing changed. I gave it back to her because I was tired of it. Many tears after school. Not worst, but definitely the most crazy. We had a science teacher that got off on blowing up. The class was earth science, rocks, volcanoes, etc. There was no physics or chemistry in the curriculum, but he would just throw in random chemistry and physics demonstrations because would explode. Some of the crazy he did: hung a test tube from the ceiling, filled with water, plugged the top, and put a burner under it. Cork shot out of the room, across the hall. Demonstrated a dust explosion. Had a metal paint can with a rubber hose in the side, put a candle inside, some cornstarch in the tube, hammer the lid shut, and blow. 6-foot-high flame, and the lid knocked out the ceiling tiles and broke the metal grid for the drop ceiling. He repeated this about 6 or 7 times just so that we understood what was happening. Put sodium and potassium in water. Sodium didn't react fast enough for his taste, so he would use a lighter to ignite the hydrogen coming off of it to speed things along. He went up to almost a tablespoon of potassium, and it exploded a 5-gallon batter jar. Filled a beaker with sugar and poured in some sulfuric acid to make a black char snake. There was this big area above his desk where the steel beams were corroded. He wouldn't talk about what happened.